Good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to the Taylor Hopkinson IR35 webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Fiona McRae and I'm the COO of Taylor Hopkinson. Before we get started, we would just like to run through a couple of pieces of housekeeping. Could we ask everybody just to remain on mute and also keep your video settings turned off for the duration of the webinar? We do have a chat room available, so you can send questions and we will be looking to respond to as many of those as we can, either during or after the webinar. And also we remain available for communication after the session is complete. Just another piece of housekeeping, we don't expect any fire alarms today. However, we are in the office, so if anything untoward does happen, we would need to clear the building. Other than that, we hope that you'll find today a very useful session. And the aim of today really is for Taylor Hopkinson to discuss with you IR35, what it is, how it will affect you, what you can do to prepare for it, and also how we as a business intend to support you. We'll also then attend to some questions and answers at the end. First of all, introductions. My name, as I say, is Fiona McRae. I'm the COO of Taylor Hopkinson. I've been with the business for 11 years and I am responsible for running the compliance operations side of the business internationally. A lot of you will have worked with several of my team members and I also know a lot of you personally also.
I'm Leslie Murray. I'm the Finance Director at Taylor Hopkinson and I've been with the company just under 4 years. Again, like Fiona, you've worked with probably Amanda in my team, and I've got overall responsibility for the financial matters at Taylor Hopkinson.
Okay, so we'd like to go straight into IR35. It's something we feel like we've been talking about for a long time, but we're keen to provide as much information and get as much feedback from you as possible on it. So over to you, Leslie.
Thanks, Fiona. So just a quick overview of what exactly is IR35 and the Off-Payroll Working Rules 21. So IR35 refers to the UK's legislation aimed at taxing disguised employment at a rate similar to standard employment. So in this context, disguised employees means workers who receive payments from a client via an intermediary, for example, their own limited company, and whose relationship with their client is such that had they been paid directly, they would be employees of the client. The reform places responsibility for assessing whether IR35 applies onto the private sector end user or clients of the workers or contractors' services for all payments by medium and large businesses from the 6th of April 2021. Where it is concluded by the end client that IR35 applies, the fee payer, which in this case would be us, Taylor Hopkinson, will become responsible for accounting for and paying the related tax and NIC, including the additional cost of employers' NIC, directly to HMRC. If the end user makes the status determination that assignment is outside IR35, they must ensure that reasonable care was taken during the decision making and the decision itself can be substantiated. So how do we assess this? There's a number of online tools. Firstly, there's HMRC's own CESS tool, or Check Employment Status for Tax. And then there are a number of private sector companies who have developed their own specialist IR35 consultancy tools, such as Brooks and Grant Thornton and EY. And some of our clients and other clients have developed their own in-house assessment software and processes. So the status determination statement, or the SDS, is produced and shared with the contractor and the agency.
Okay, so now just having a look at how we determine whether an assignment is inside or outside IR35. There are some key criteria which are reviewed to establish the status. A decision is then made about a hypothetical contract between the contractor and the client, and whether, if those two parties were contracting directly, there would then be an employment relationship. However, the route to determining the status is fact specific, and in some cases we know there's not a clear outcome. Essentially, if you as a contractor have similar working conditions, responsibilities and control as an employee of the client would have, then it's possible that you'll be classed as inside IR35, and therefore the off-payroll working rules apply. There's a lot of case law evolving constantly around tax tribunals, courts and employment tribunals, but the key factors that determine the status are still as follows. Substitution. A right of substitution has long been deemed to be a very important factor when demonstrating whether an assignment falls inside or outside. However, it needs to be remembered that for a substitution clause to be considered valid, this has to be a genuine substitution right, and the client must agree to it in practice. Control and directions. So in most cases where professional services are provided, it's really important that a contractor can demonstrate a certain amount of autonomy in the way they undertake their project. And this factors around both the written contract and also the working practices. It really has to be shown that the client has no influence over how the contractor performs their services. And lastly, mutuality of obligation. Now, this is a very hotly disputed area of the law because HMRC position is quite different to a lot of law practitioners. And this focuses on an obligation between the parties to provide and accept work from and for each other. And in an employment relationship, the mutuality of obligation is easy to establish. However, in contractor relationships, it's less clear. Just a few other factors that need to be considered: provision of equipment, absence procedures, continuity of the engagement, notice periods, and just generally whether a contractor has really seen to become part and parcel of the organisation. So what would be the process for appeal if a status determination was such that you did not agree with it? The legislation poses the obligation on the client to provide a process that can be followed for a disagreement. So either the recruiter or the contractor may disagree and follow the process then. The client has to respond to the review request, and the response has to be provided within 45 days. The client must either confirm that the determination is correct and give their reasons, or provide a new status determination and reach a different conclusion and withdraw the previous one. If the contractor disagrees with the determination, they will need to write to the client and give those reasons why. Fee payers, Taylor Hopkinson in this instance, must ensure that we keep records of the status determinations and any corresponding disagreements. And during the dispute process, it must be remembered the client's determination does stand until the matter has been fully resolved.
Okay, so since we had our last webinar, we'll all be aware that the IR35 legislation was due to come into effect in April this year, and it was delayed sort of at the last minute due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, at the beginning of July, royal assent has been granted for the legislation, and we think this gives the strongest indicator that it will come into practice in 21, and there's unlikely to be further delays to the legislation. So since then, HMRC have made changes to the guidance in its employment status manual to help businesses that may be affected by the new rules, and whether this is as a supplier or as a recipient of services. This includes confirmation that HMRC won't use the information acquired as a result of the changes to the IR35 rules to check whether IR35 should have applied in previous tax years. There's also a new template for businesses to use when responding to a worker who asks if the new rules apply. There's further guidance and examples on how businesses who have decided that IR35 applies to a contract it has with a service provider should calculate PAYE deductions. And there's also new guidance on the interaction between statutory payments and the IR35 rules, explaining how the IR35 rules interact with the CIS rules.
Okay, so looking at how our clients will respond to the changes. Now, this is a new year and we have a variety of different types of clients and different projects, so no one size fits all. But we do expect that a lot of clients will react with moderate responses. They're completing internal audit and risk assessments, and status determination assessments will be completed as soon as possible. Early 2021 is expected, if not before. We just want to stress that Taylor Hopkinson are working hard to encourage and support this process with our clients as early as possible. We also know that clients will be working with external consultants to audit and assess roles, and also implementing changes that are required after these assessments are completed. We do know that some businesses have policy changes around engagement with PSCs or limited companies. in some cases ceasing all work with PSCs, in other words, blanket bans, so to speak. This is something that we actively work against and try to encourage our clients to consider all options when they look at how they can approach IR35. All clients will be reviewing their contracts and working practices and trying to understand the potential for alternative models. Again, this is something that Taylor Hopkinson are championing. And lastly, ongoing communication. This is something that's vitally important, and directly between ourselves and you contractors, and also via clients, the communication process will be clear and consistent. So just now looking at how Taylor Hopkinson can support you following your IR35 assessments.
Okay, so there's a Taylor Hopkinson deemed employment IR35 deduction service. So once the client IR35 assessments have been finalised, which we hope to be in early 2021, there will be one of two options. You'll either be deemed inside IR35 or outside IR35. If once we receive a determination of inside IR35, the off-payroll working model will be agreed with the client and yourselves, and updated contracts will be issued by Taylor Hopkinson, and the additional tax information requested will be issued. If applicable, we will work with you to submit appeals if we believe there is a case. If you're deemed as outside IR35, we'll update your contract file with the status determination for compliance purposes, and if applicable, at the request of the client, we'll issue you with an updated contract. Once we get to April 21, when the off-roll payroll deductions begin, within IR35, deemed employment deductions will be made by Taylor Hopkinson and net payments made to you. We will then do the RTI reporting and make payments of tax directly to HMRC. If you're deemed outside IR35, the contract will continue with no changes to the payment structure. However, it should be noted that any new assignments will require new status determination to be done at the time.
Okay, and how will this impact you as a contractor? We know that that's a question on everybody's lips. Roles are looking to be advertised with a preliminary status against them. In the public sector, agencies and clients began to advertise their roles with an expected IR35 status, and this is likely to happen in the private sector as well. While it's not concrete, at least it can start to manage expectations and allow you to plan. Clients will also assess your status before commencing with a contract. Reasonable care has to be taken, however, there is yet to be a clear definition of this. Clients will use HMRC SETH tool or a third-party software to review. And in some circumstances, the status will be determined on limited factors, such as the role specifics, as opposed to you as an individual. So before commencing the contract, the end client must provide a status determination which says whether or not they believe IR35 applies, as well as why. And if inside, the fee payer will make necessary deductions, in this case Taylor Hopkinson, after the SDS, the status determination, is received. Taylor Hopkinson, or potentially an umbrella service provider, would become your deemed employer and would be required to deduct the relevant tax and national insurance contributions before paying you then. How can Taylor Hopkinson support you if you are deemed to be inside for the purposes of your assignment? So we're making several options available in terms of an alternative model. And again, we need to caveat this with this depends on how our clients wish to proceed, and obviously we'll provide all of those options as available to them. So inside IR35 deemed employment calculations, should an individual wish to continue to engage as a contractor, limited company, and be deemed inside IR35, then Taylor Hopkinson can calculate a deemed employment payment using our InPay software. No fees apply to you as a contractor for this service. There's also an option to work as an individual worker on a fixed term contract for services. So Taylor Hopkinson would therefore directly contract with an individual and not a personal service company, and we would make deemed employment deductions. There would also be a fixed end date to the contract, and the rates would be inclusive of things like holiday pay. Again, there's no fee applying to this for this service to contractors. Third option, umbrella company employment. We're able to provide introductions and discount rates for several regulated umbrella companies. We are aware of the vast range of umbrella companies out there, and we do have potential partners that we can introduce to you at least for advice. There are weekly fees included in those services from umbrella providers. However, they provide insurance cover and other benefits along with that. And lastly, something that's not always an appropriate model, however, could be considered is statement of work contracts. Again, more information available where appropriate from Taylor Hopkinson.
Okay, so what are the benefits of the Taylor Hopkinson deemed employment deduction service? Well, firstly, you'll have continuity of systems. You'll be able to continue to use the Taylor Hopkinson in-time timesheet system, and the process will remain the same for the submission of monthly timesheets. It'll also will also continue our continuity of service and support teams. So the Taylor Hopkinson finance team and contract support team will remain the same, and it'll be the same familiar faces on hand to help you. As Fiona touched on, there's no fees to contractors or workers, so Taylor Hopkinson are absorbing the setup and integration costs for the new system, and our teams will be on hand to provide ongoing service and support at this time of change to both you, the contractors, and our clients. There's transparency as well. We're committed to making the deductions and remitting all the required taxes and national insurance monthly to HMRC in line with legislation. And this will mean that we'll have availability for audit and review of contractual templates at any time. And as always, we'll maintain our direct and clear lines of communication with you.
Okay, so what can you do to prepare? We would encourage you to keep an open dialogue with us, your agency, and also end clients. Understanding the intentions of clients is the first step. So your tax status won't be your decision anymore following April 2021. So speaking to us and speaking to the client is the best way to determine what will happen and how it will happen. Check your status. While we're not necessarily saying that CEST is the most recommended tool for general use, it is likely to be the first port of call for many end clients. It's available online and it's free through HMRC. Using the tool will give you a heads up of what your result could be. And remember that you may have differing opinions on how some of the questions are answered, but at least it's a start. You may also want to have an independent IR35 contract review completed for the same reasons. We can help you and introduce you to companies who can do this, and we will be looking to provide this service as an additional support. Until the reform takes place in 2021, contractors will still be responsible to determine their own status for IR35. And it's advised that you keep assessing your own status with contract reviews and look to protect yourself against an inquiry by showing that you've been through this process. If you are engaged to a small business, the current rules will actually still apply even after reform, meaning you will continue to determine your own status as normal with no changes. Now, just to specify the meaning or the examples of a small business, the government have indicated that a business with a turnover of less than 10.2 million, a balance sheet of less than 5.1 million, or 50 employees or less would be looked at as a small business. Now, we just need to make it very clear that it's likely the majority of our clients would not fall into that category. And just lastly, we're just telling you, please don't panic. The private sector has been awarded time to prepare, and that time can be used wisely, and we've been using it wisely internally to ensure that you're well equipped and you're aware of the rules and changes.
Okay, so what are we as Taylor Hopkinson doing? So we understand that as an intermediary and consultancy, we have an important role to play in the IR35 reform and how this pans out for you, our contractors. Not only could we become potentially liable for IR35 as the fee payer in certain scenarios, but we're determined to continue to provide our contractor base with great opportunities to earn money and progress. So we'll work very hard to encourage and support end clients to carry out well-informed IR35 decisions as soon as possible, and also to avoid blanket bans on PSCs. We're also keeping discussions open around the various contracting models available and how we can review working practices, agreements, etc. in line with the legislation. We're aware that not all of our clients will react in the same way, but we're aiming to have feedback within the next few weeks about how this is going. We're well aware that a lot of clients are committed to finding a way to continue to engage with contractors as a highly valued part of their workforce. So we're soon going to have updated content on the IR35 Hub on the Taylor Hopkinson website, and we'll be keeping this updated on an ongoing basis over the coming months. We're going to host a webinar similar to this with our clients and conduct a survey in late November 2020. We're also working on an IR35 brochure, which we'll be able to share with you all, which will include information on our services and how they will evolve. It will include model calculations and options in terms of payroll models, and also some general advice on how we can help you. We're committed to supporting and being as transparent and informative as possible, but also as flexible as possible, so that we can work with the clients to keep engaging with our contractors for projects, but maintaining within legislation.
Thanks. So just thank you to everybody who's taken part in our survey. The survey does remain open, and we will continue to look at the results as they come through. I think initially today we just wanted to pull out a few of the responses that really stood out for us, and that hopefully we've been addressing throughout the course of today and beyond. So the first, really large result that stood out to us was when asked about the understanding of the IR35 payroll changes, we were looking at over 80% of people felt that their understanding was between fair and very bad. Now, this relates quite closely to several of our other of the questions, but it's something that we are very aware of, and we'll be working hard to communicate, educate, and also collaborate to ensure that people have as much information as possible. We understand there are still a lot of grey areas, but we're working hard to try and clarify those as much as possible. The next response around whether discussions had started around IR35 between yourself and any client that you may be working for. At the moment, we're looking at just under 80% who said no, those discussions have not yet started. This isn't something to be alarmed about, it is expected, but we would hope and expect that that will soon change over the coming weeks as we start speaking to our clients, and also those discussions start between you and those clients. And lastly, have you completed a status determination for your current position? Again, quite reflective of the previous question. Over 70% have said no, there's not yet been a status determination. We would fully expect over the coming weeks and months that that number will reduce hugely, and that actually pretty much every single contractor and role will be assessed over the coming months. Again, we're working hard to help to support for that to happen as quickly as possible. So now we just would like to move on. We've obviously had a lot of questions directly through the survey and from some of you directly as well, and we continue to be available to answer those on an ongoing basis. We'll also be sharing these slides following the webinar, and we'll be responding in detail to all of those questions. However, initially we just wanted to pull out a few example questions, and maybe we thought we could help by answering those for all of you today. So Leslie, first question. Why doesn't the substitution clause in a standard contract cover the IR35 issue?
Okay, so as we noted previously, for a substitution clause to be valid, the client must agree to it. And in practice, that would mean that the PSC or limited company would have to source and pay for the substitute. The client would also have to accept the substitute if the original contractor wasn't available. So just because this clause is in the contract doesn't necessarily mean in practice that it would be applicable and acceptable to the client.
Thanks. And the next question, will Taylor Hopkinson tax at source where required?
So yes, if required, we will make the deductions of tax before we pay you, and effectively pay you net of tax deductions and pay HMRC the tax directly.
And why are some end clients unfairly placing freelancers inside regardless?
So we've seen some clients adopt a risk-averse approach to IR35, and that they've introduced blanket bans on PSCs, or perhaps determining all contractors to be within IR35. I think this is to do with their appetite for risk. And also we need to know that some clients are working for either public sector bodies or within the public sector, and that probably has further influence on their decision to do that. But as we said earlier on in the webinar, we are actively challenging these decisions with clients where appropriate to do so. Thanks.
And how likely are HMRC to start retrospective investigations?
So again, HMRC have said repeatedly that it won't use information collected as a result of the off-payroll implementation to take retrospective action against individuals. However, they have caveated that by saying if they suspect fraud to have taken place, then that wouldn't be applicable.
Thanks. So we've just had a question through the chat, and the question is, would it be possible to be considered as a supplier and not a contractor if a PO system was used? Now, this takes me back to one of the models that we were talking about, where there is a potential for a statement of work contract. Now, depending on the circumstances, depending on the project, it is possible for a technical services or scope of work contract to be agreed, where the purpose of the scope and the value of the scope would be agreed prior to the work commencing. Now, that could be a consideration. It would need to be agreed by the client, and it also would need to be within a very strict guideline in terms of what would happen should the time scales stretch out, or what would happen should the project either be cut short or take longer than expected. The short answer is it depends on the client and the project and the work, but it's certainly something that could be discussed and considered. Okay, we've got another question here. Would there be any fees from Taylor Hopkinson in relation to administering IR35 and the required changes?
So as we touched on earlier, all the potential payroll methods that we're offering would not be a cost to the contractors, with the only exception being if a contractor chooses to go through an umbrella solution themselves, then the umbrella company would charge fees.
Okay, next question. Where can I work, geographically speaking, where IR35 would not apply? So the
IR35 legislation does apply to the UK, and obviously Taylor Hopkinson have opportunities outside of the UK for contracting. However, just one point to note, that if you're not working in the UK, doesn't mean that you're not liable for tax. Or perhaps working abroad would make you tax liable within that country. So there's not a one size fits all approach to this, and it would be specific to certain circumstances. So we would support you as that case arises as to what the tax implications would be.
Okay, and another question similar is, does this affect non-UK citizens?
So the nationality of you doesn't determine whether IR35 applies or not. It would be if you were deemed as tax resident in the UK. So that would mean either living within the UK, so you could live within the UK and not be a UK citizen, or be employed within the UK and become a tax liable through that.
Okay, great, thank you. So what we're going to do now is would like to wrap up the call for today. We do have a large list of questions, and there's quite a broad range there, and we would like to thank you again for your attention to the survey and also for your questions. We do intend to respond to all of those in detail, and with complete confidentiality, however, sharing as much information as we can, we will be following up with everybody. Just also a point to note, apologies, we did have our tax expert who was due to attend with us today. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, she was not able to join us. However, we will be setting up a follow-up webinar with specific tax advice for individuals where relevant regarding IR35, and we will be sharing that information with you over the coming weeks. For now, we would just like to say thank you very much for your time today, and we've just been asked if you can have a copy of the slideshow. Yes, of course you can, and we'd be happy to hear your comments and feedback as well. Be much appreciated. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd be doing some of these briefs in person, but as you know, at the moment, it's just not possible. So thanks again to everybody for listening, and we look forward to seeing you and speaking to you all very soon.